Okay, I'm checking hands. A few of you are taking your votes off. Okay, next on our agenda is item number 17. Superintendent Dixon, are you prepared to brief us on school reopening plans?
I am. I'm ready and willing, more than willing. We're going to share some slides with you, so I'm going to keep my camera off, and you can focus on the slides, and hopefully you can hear me better that way. We're really grateful for this time. I know that you've been very anxious to get this information, and we've spent a lot of time going through the information. So Jeff, if you'll advance the slide, please. Today, what we hope to accomplish is to really just kind of take you through the process. So we'll introduce how we went through these plans. We'll give you a high overview of a compliance report. We'll share some key takeaways with you, both things that we saw as highlights and challenges. And we want to focus on these 4 areas that some of you have asked about, how things were communicated. We know that you've had a lot of information from both public comment today as well as emails on this topic. We'll look at various delivery models and schedules and look at accommodations for employees who have determined that they need some assistance, who are concerned, and then also mitigation tactics by school setting. And then we'll end by talking about the next steps and listen to your feedback and answer your questions. So let's start with just kind of an introduction. Before we go into the formal timeline, I just want to give a shout out to our staff who have been involved in this. I think I will turn my camera on for this. Really so grateful to staff who have spent all weekend looking at these plans. I will say that we started off by thinking we could involve a lot of people getting into the plans, but as we started looking at each one, we realized that the smaller the group and the more consistent we could be, the better. So Tiffany Stanley, Melissa Cano, Jill Curry, and myself spent some time over the weekend, many hours over the weekend and into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the heavy lifting truly was not done by me. I reviewed a bunch of them over the weekend. But Tiffany, the minute she hit the ground from Alaska, her mini vacation, and she was working while she was there. But Melissa, Tiffany, and then Jill was so willing to just jump in and help us. So that's kind of the process of reviewing. Remember that they were due on Saturday. So we started reviewing them as they came in. And most of them came in on that during that Thursday to Saturday period. So during June, we had a group that met to develop requirements for school opening plans. We had a lot of input, and that came from advisory groups, and it came from the medical community. We looked at the CDC requirements. It came from COVID advisory, our advisory group, just a lot of people weighing in on what they thought needed to happen. And so then we took those to the board, to you, and it was a pretty quick turnaround, but you had a great discussion about requirements and recommendations. Remember that our first iteration was also based on Utah leads and looking at some of the requirements there, but really trying to play that out a little bit more finitely so that we could have school plans that were reflective of what you, the board, felt like they needed to require. We also then went back to the Utah Leads group and asked for those incorporated, for those requirements and recommendations to be incorporated into the FACE guidelines and authorized by executive order so that they are enforceable, and at the same time not relying on the process of the Utah Leads, but really putting that squarely in the hands of the board so that we could be nimble and flexible. On July 17th, Governor Herbert came out and gave the executive order around requiring face coverings for all school property and buses. And that then also changed some of the plans or elements of plans that people were putting in place in their districts and charters. We received the plans this Saturday, and we're here to talk to you about that today. So as we check through the plans, Go ahead, Jeff. We want you to see what we were looking at. So this is the template that you approved in board meeting. You can see on the left, it was kind of opening where they just basically put their LEA name. They had an attestation there as to whether or not they had their governing board approve the plan, and then the website. So we checked on all of those web links to make sure that they were active links. And if we couldn't find one, we immediately notified the LEA. We found some were broken and some were just sort of buried, and we had to hunt a bit. But I would say for the most part, that was very easy. We could find the plans posted on the website, and it was generally a plan that was built out. Some actually posted this template in addition to a build out plan, and others you won't see the template, but you'll see their plan fully fleshed out. You'll see that we had some assurances that we asked for, and the whole template was laid out in what is required, and then they filled in how they were accomplishing that requirement. So that's how that's what we were seeing and what you approved and how we went through the plans. I don't often pause, Jeff, so my pause is your cue to switch. So the other thing that you approved in connection to the template was adding in this mitigation tactics. And this is where we talked through with our LEAs and with you as well to think about the various settings of transition and entry exit points and transportation, restrooms, hallways, cafeterias. And then we looked at these mitigation tactics of isolating symptoms and minimizing outbreak probabilities, physical distancing, respiratory hygiene, and physical hygiene. And we asked them to fill this in to really think about how to mitigate some of the issues of health and safety in their buildings. And I think I misspoke in that you didn't approve the template, but you directed us to create it and require that they submitted their plan by use of the template. So I misspoke there. Tiffany, thanks for that correction. But these are the things that were in the plan that they returned to us. So the template that you saw and this mitigation tactics component that was at the end of it. You've heard us talk a lot about these 7 elements, and you also heard teachers talk about this today and others in public comment. I was actually really pleased to hear people bring this up. I'm always a little dismayed when I hear a member of a school board or a teacher or a principal may not have heard of these, because I think they're pretty common with CDC. And some of our LEAs, in fact, most, have done a really good job of using the tools that we have, either the training from Levitt Group or other training that they have from the CDC or whatever they've come up with, to really discuss these 7 elements. And I just, again, put it out there to remind you of the things that we based the template and the health mitigation tactics on. So let's talk about the compliance report. And this is just a compilation, high-level look after we got into all 173 plans. And I say 173 because we had one that hasn't been turned in yet, and we followed up with that particular charter today. Again, just high level, but all of them have attested or provided evidence that their local board approved the plan. And again, that website was evidence. You actually can see a lot of it dated or go into their board meetings where that was approved. They've been very good about linking it to the when. And those who didn't have the plan posted, as I mentioned, they're working on it. If there was a broken link, I know I was looking at a particular district that I loved the way it was laid out on their website, and I went to see it yesterday, and they were doing some updates to their website, and so the link was broken. But I know it will be right back up and running because it was an awesome website. We reviewed them to look and see whether the assurance was provided. So you saw on that prior slide where it was a yes or no checkbox, and then we had some open-ended space for them to describe how they responded to that requirement. So when we looked at our rubric and just said, were the assurances met, it wasn't just the yes, no checkbox, but did they go on to respond to that? So we found a couple of areas where there was common I don't know if non-compliance is the right term, but we'll use that term just to explain that we didn't see that the requirements were met here. So, for example, there was a requirement to provide training on symptom monitoring or outbreak probability. So it might have addressed face coverings or other mitigation tactics. And in some cases, that was either blank or didn't address the right training. Also, as I mentioned earlier, some people jumped right on it and got the minute that we put out the template, it was filled out. And they turned it in as soon as our link went live for submission at coronavirus.schools.utah.gov. And we had to go back after we looked at their website to see that those items weren't matching. So that was another place where we just said, oh, we see this on your website as your official approved plan. We just don't see it reflected in the template. So those corrections have been made as well. So some of the key takeaways, we were pleased to see that in every delivery model, there were options for families. I think we might have seen one charter that didn't offer some kind of remote option, but there were options in every single plan for families to choose from. We're not making judgments about necessarily the quality in this report, but at least every family had an option. Also, there was contingency planning. This became very clear. They were talking about they could execute any delivery model as necessary based on the status of the virus. And that was specifically played out. And we'll show you some examples of what that looked like in the plans. There were some great visual attachments or insertions to show how they are making these decisions. There was also this layering of strategies to mitigate risk. So in the blue mitigation tactics box, for example, you could see that there were some heightened levels of cleaning, or it might be a heightened level of communication. So they were layering strategies according to the area of the building or the status of the virus to try and mitigate the risk. There was also evidence of local health department collaboration. We found this in every plan, and they certainly in the districts, we could see this very strongly. I know in one particular district, they have a committee that they meet with twice a week, and that's comprised of local health, a prominent hospital in the area, county commissioners, mayors, doctors, and they're meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And you know, that's a great example of a lot of meeting and work and collaboration, but personally meeting with the 13 local health directors, we know that they're meeting with their schools. And so we saw high evidence again, especially with the districts and most of the charters, of this collaboration with health departments. We also saw kind of a cascading communication and training. So obviously, we're reaching out to superintendents and charter directors. That tends to be our touch point for all of this. They are responsible for turning things into us. We could see where they had worked with their building administrators, but in many of the plans, we also noted, and this was an aha for me, a lot of the communication training with teachers isn't happening until they report back to school or a week before school. Now, there was communication. I think almost all of them conducted a survey at some point, whether it was in the spring or 2 or 3 times. So there was some survey work going on and some communication, but in terms of the details of the plan and working through all of those tactics, it's happening as they return for the most part. We have a member of our principal advisory group. He also serves on the larger COVID advisory group and is featured in one of our training videos, Robert Kinghorn Davis. And he's an example of somebody who took those 7 characteristics and looking at CDC guidelines and things in our handbook, and had his teachers come in and he's walked through, especially those that were concerned, and he walked them through the school and through their classrooms to think about what they needed and what they could do to mitigate risk as much as possible. So it's not that there haven't been key communications going on with teachers, but definitely we see them being the end of the row. And a lot of that training is happening now during this month in prep for school. So let's focus on communication for a bit, because this is something that, as I said, really popped out at us as something where there were amazing highlights, but also some challenges. I was really impressed with websites and the fact that websites and emails were going out to families in multiple languages. If you go to for example, if you go to Park City, Wasatch, Salt Lake, San Juan, you'll see on their websites that it's very prominent in Spanish. You don't have to go look for the Spanish version. It's right there. And in the case of San Juan, they also put out information not only in Spanish, but in Navajo. So being able to watch a video in your primary language or get an email or a letter in your primary language is very helpful to a family in order to make sure that their student is prepared and has access and knows what to do. I also appreciate training that's being conducted for parents on Canvas. A lot of our LEAs are doing this, whether it's Canvas or another platform or digital tools that they're using, particularly in Salt Lake, because they have a unique model where they're starting out a little bit later and then in a remote fashion as they bring their students in the first couple of weeks and have kind of these personal planning sessions with each student to figure out what they need and where they're at, as well as some of the digital tools that they might need. Having parents come with students and being able to train them on Canvas right there, and also put out videos in their primary language to train them on Canvas. We've just seen some great efforts to better prepare our parents in that digital space. And that, we had to flip so quickly in the spring that wasn't the case. And that was very clear to us that parents needed additional support and help. We also noted this reciprocal accountability. So there were some communications that were really clear, like in Garfield and Ogden, where it was clear what Ogden School District and Garfield School District are responsible for, what they're expecting from parents, what they're expecting from their teachers, their principals, etc. So really clearly defined who's accountable for what is the health department accountable for, etc. Some of the challenges that we noted in the plans, again, I mentioned this, that some of the updates and resources aren't getting to teachers and parents in some cases. We've spoken with teachers that felt that they had to go out and buy their own supplies for PP&E, for example, and yet every district and charter can tell you how they're acquiring these items. And there might be digital tools that they're really interested in, and not understanding that their district or our state has a license for some of those tools so that they don't have to purchase it on their own. So this kind of goes down to that third bullet as well, but making sure we have a single point or an easier point of access to resources for tools and teachers and families. We have a website that's great, has a lot of information on there, and we've had to direct people to it who didn't know about it. So just really trying to get information into the hands of our teachers and families. Sorry, waiting for clock to stop. And along with that same issue of just the timeliness and clarity of the additional health guidance and tools. Certainly when the COVID-19 manual came out from the Department of Health, it was a great tool. I mean, a lot of good things in there. And in spite of us trying to be clear that it was additional guidance, it wasn't a set of new requirements or a big change, but just putting that in their hands and having 102 pages really overwhelmed a lot of our educators. And also the way it was perhaps rolled out at their district level felt overwhelming for some of our principals. So those are some of the challenges that we noted and things that we're trying to overcome based on feedback from the field, from our advisory groups, and just things we noted in the plans. So we want to talk a little bit about the delivery models, and Tiffany, who spent more time in the plans that I did, is going to talk about this, but note just to start with it, we're going to talk about districts first, because there were 41 district plans and 134 charter plans. So Tiffany?
Thank you. So Tiffany Stanley, Chief of Staff. So we knew that delivery models would be of particular interest. So we spent a significant amount of time categorizing and quantifying school districts' planned delivery models. And this table just provides an overview of how that shook out. So what's common across all plans, as highlighted by Superintendent Dixon, is included across the top and bottom of this table. So just keep that in mind that as you look at each of these approaches that school districts are taking, that each of them are also taking into account these two common elements, which are providing options for families to choose delivery models and this contingency planning to execute alternative delivery models as necessary. So Superintendent Dixon mentioned that we'd show you some visual examples. I actually removed those from the slide deck for sake of time at the last minute. So I apologize, Superintendent Dixon, but I'll just mention some examples that you can Google at the end once I describe what these four models are. So the four main approaches that we identified were in person, where a full in-person schedule option is available. So there are 24 districts in this category, but quite a lot of variation within it. And I'll also mention that that is as of, yesterday. I know that plans are being considered and discussed at this very moment, I think. So just note that. So a couple of things to note as far as the variation within this category. Many of the districts noted that while they're providing a full in-person option, they're hoping to reduce class sizes and the number of students on campus by providing these alternative options for families. So, of course, the extent to which that occurs depends on how many families choose alternative options. So, for example, we noticed that Nebo School District called out that 95% have opted to be in person, whereas, and this is a charter school, but it's just one that particularly called out this percentage. Mountain Sunrise Academy reported that 70% have opted for remote. So we don't have that data for all districts, but it just shows that the extent to which the providing of options reduces class sizes or promotes physical distancing really depends on how those options are taken up. So this category also includes 3 districts who have delayed their school starts, but once they do begin, intend to provide for the full in-person option. And just for your awareness, rationale that was provided in these cases was generally time for staff to prepare to implement alternative delivery models and implement mitigation tactics. So I'll also highlight several of these districts in this in-person category are providing the alternative options by providing live streaming instruction, or they're recording instruction to provide to students at home or in an alternative setting. So in these cases, families may have the option to attend in person or attend via live broadcast at home, or recorded at home, or some combination of both, even doing staggered schedules this way. So some districts that are providing this this live streaming instruction or recording of instruction include Rich, Millard, Kane, Uinta, and there are likely others. So the second category, what we're calling hybrid A, this is an in-person option available with a modified schedule. And this is generally either a shortened day and or a remote day. So there are 13 districts that fall into this category. In general, the rationale provided for this approach included time for cleaning on those remote days or on the early out or during the early out portion, providing more teacher preparation time to provide both in-person and remote instruction, and then also providing small group instruction or individual intervention. Within this, 5 districts are doing remote days, 8 districts are doing a shortened schedule, and some of them are doing both. Some of them are doing both remote day and shortened schedule. So the third category is hybrid B. That's what we're calling it, which is in person, but an A-B type staggered schedule where like half of the week is in person, half of the week is online. This is being done at least partially in 3 districts that are listed here. Ogden is a unique case and was difficult to categorize. Their elementary is in person, but secondary schools, their plan states that they're authorized to adopt the staggered schedule model, but it doesn't look like the district's requiring it. So at this point, it's unclear how many schools in Ogden will be going the staggered route. And then number 4, this 4th category is remote only. Currently, just 1 district, Salt Lake City School District, has chosen this approach. I have just spoken a lot. I'm okay to take questions now, Chair Huntsman, or do you want me to keep going through the end of the presentation?
Let's go to the end of the presentation because I'm sure you'll probably answer a few questions. So please continue.
Okay. Yep. We'll be happy to circle back to some of these slides for reference with the questions. So with charter schools, given our rapid turnaround time, we weren't able to quantify all the different delivery models. We've provided rough estimates based on our, review of the plans. And similar to the school districts, we did see most, if not all, but 1 or 2 providing options for families to choose delivery models. In general, a remote option, but in some instances, a remote or hybrid option. And then we also saw contingency planning to execute delivery models based on the status of the virus. We saw perhaps a few more charters than districts percentage-wise pursuing the hybrid A, hybrid B, and remote-only approaches, particularly in secondary schools. But as you can see here, these are really general estimates because we haven't had a chance to really quantify them. So nothing to really hang your hat on yet. So for sake of time, I won't go into detail on these examples that I've provided just for illustration. But we did want to highlight the unique approach taken by Greenwood Charter School. So similar to many others, they're dividing all classes into 2 groups titled a Group A and a Group B. The Group A will attend classes in person on A day, and Group B will attend classes at home online. What's unique is that each student in this school will be assigned a learning partner from the opposite section of the class. So if the student's in Group A, their partner will be in Group B. And that student's learning partner that's in the class that day will be responsible to connect with their classroom buddy that is learning from home online through Google Hangouts. And the student partner will use their buddy when there's a turn and talk in class to engage the student that's participating at home. And they'll also let the teacher know if the student has a question. We just thought this was a unique way to accomplish this particular approach and provide connectedness for students. So just wanted to call that one out. All right, next slide. So we also know there's...
Tiffany, sorry. Before you go there, can I just add in something? Mm-hmm. I don't feel like I really stressed this at the beginning of this slide set where we talk about the various models. I want to underscore the time and attention that's been given to determining the models. And again, the ability to be agile and nimble and having several models in place that they can go to. I just know that principals have given up their summer. Normally they have a couple of weeks off in the summer and they haven't been able to take that. Principals, superintendents, charter directors, they've been meeting with a variety of people, a variety of stakeholders, and really trying to lean in and get these plans shored up. And I just have to give a shout out to all the work that's been put into these plans. We couldn't see a plan that looked like it had been done in a day or two. They were really well thought out. And so I'm just really proud of the work that's gone into these, and we wanted to underscore that.
Yes, thank you so much. That was definitely a key takeaway as we reviewed these plans. So we also know that accommodating high-risk employees is of particular interest. As you'll recall, the state requirements we have in this space are to create a process for staff to identify as high risk and have a plan in place to address requests for alternative arrangements. So in response to this question in the template, LEAs attested to implementing a process to review requests and work with employees to provide safety measures. That was common, that they attested to that, but their approaches varied. In some instances, they didn't provide much more detail, but in others, we were able to pull out a few differences. So, for example, some addressed through the ADA process, depending on the COVID risk factor and the specific request. Not all COVID risk factors are really eligible to go through the ADA process, but anyway, for those that do, there was reference to that process. Some accommodate staff requests to work remotely. Explicitly, they called that out, that they would accommodate those, at least consider them. Others mentioned providing N95 masks specifically. And one created a specific local school board policy to facilitate multiple accommodations for high-risk employees. So that was a bit unique. Processes used really varied, but this is an example of a specific process over here in this gray box. That was outlined by one LEA where proactive steps were taken to contact staff early on. This has already occurred. And request that they reach out. In addition, a survey was administered where staff were asked to identify measures that could be implemented. And then they followed up with individual calls from HR. So that's just an example of a process that was a bit more specific. So next slide. So lastly, we just wanted to provide an overview of mitigation tactics by school settings. So as Superintendent Dixon showed you at the beginning of the presentation, the template included a table that required each LEA to apply the problem-solving framework to based on the mitigating factors and the situational characteristics to identify tactics across school settings. So from that table, these are just some examples and a sampling of what LEAs included. And we saw LEAs really adopting and layering tactics in accordance with the intent of that framework as well as CDC guidelines. So in classrooms, some of the common themes were utilization of large places to conduct classes, students facing forward, removal of unnecessary furniture, and hand hygiene routines upon entry and exit. In cafeterias, we saw common themes of allowing non-traditional places to eat, like outside or in common areas, and staggering lunch times or eating in the classroom. With transitions, we saw quite a bit of using backpacks as opposed to lockers to avoid congestion and staggering transition times. With entry and exit, again, staggering arrival and departure. Special education, additional protective equipment available to educators who care for students with severe needs, and plexiglass barriers. Next slide. So in transportation, we saw things like assigned seating, cleaning after each trip, hand sanitizer, windows open for increased ventilation, and loading the back of the bus first. You can see the rest there. With unique courses, it's PE and choir being held outside or in large spaces with physical distancing, restrooms, more staggered use. Large group gatherings, there was a decent amount of variation in this space. We saw some LEAs, or a significant amount of LEAs, canceling assemblies or only holding if physical distance can be maintained. Several references to treating it on a case-by-case basis in consultation with local health. And then with recess, again, adjusting schedules, cohorting. This was a unique thing, but we did see it in several plans, providing a 5-minute cool down period to relax breathing before entering the building, which is a respiratory hygiene, or informed by the respiratory hygiene principle. So that is a quick overview of the mitigation tactics by school setting. Next slide. So next steps, as far as the reopening requirements, templates, and reopening plans, we want to provide an easy way for the public to access all the reopening plans in one place. So we're planning to post those on our webpage, and they should be there by tomorrow morning. We'll be continuing to follow up with LEAs to reach 100% compliance on assurances. We will quantify charter school delivery models and schedules, assuming there's interest in that and recognizing they could change, but wanting to.
And then we have one more we didn't list. So the last thing that we didn't list is the we have had some, I wouldn't say conflicting, but we just have a lot of different pieces of information from the medical community. And one of the things that Dr. Dunn suggested is the convening of a medical advisory committee. So it would be local health departments, state Department of Health, medical doctors. We've had some infectious disease pediatricians on our advisory council, as well as local health directors. So Betty Sue Hinkson from our office, who works with nurses, and trying to get a medical community together so that everybody is on the same page, studying the same data, and giving us the same advice. And we think that will be really helpful to our schools. And that's a group that will start to meet weekly starting tomorrow. And we'll tackle very specific questions that people come up with. So we wanted to throw that out there because we think it's something that can really inform the board and inform our LEAs. And Tiffany, I don't know if I cut you off. You were cutting in and out on my side. So if there's anything else.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. No, I was just going to note that this was a really high level overview. But if there's something specific you feel you need quantified to inform your policy making, let us know, and we'd be happy to analyze a section in more depth and provide you more quantifiable numbers and data. But that's it.
So we'll pause there for questions, Chair Huntsman.
All right. Questions, comments from board members. Board Member Gravitt.
Hi, thank you. Superintendent Dixon and Chief of Staff Stanley, thank you so much for all of your hard work. I can't even imagine the time you put into this. What I'm wondering is, after having looked at all of these plans, I would love to get some insight into what you wish the board would have done differently when we created our minimum requirements. Can you give us some insight into that?
Just trying to find my mute. That, that's a question that needs a little bit of a pause to think about. I really appreciate the variation based on context and really walking through their buildings, their situation, and knowing that what's going on in Wayne or Daggett looks very different than what's going on in Granite or Nebo. So I do appreciate that part of it. At the same time, knowing what we know now, maybe trying to help with more hybrid models where we could provide strategies, especially in our urban and suburban setting, to get class sizes down to a reasonable space. I mean, we gave some modeling and talked about it a bit. I think people are so anxious to have students back and really student focused and trying to meet those social emotional needs, as I talked about with toxic stress this morning. So I think that has definitely informed a lot of the models, which is definitely noteworthy, but providing maybe more direction on what hybrid looks like. I think we saw a lot of things called a hybrid model, which is why we tried to split that into those two models that you saw, or two categories rather, that Tiffany described, because some were more of a shortened day and had some remote built in, and then there were some that were clearly trying to reduce class size. So maybe clarity about that.
Thank you.
More questions and comments from board members? Board member Scott Hansen. Board member Hansen. Jeff, we don't show him muted.
Can't come off. Am I unmuted now?
You're good. Board member
Okay.
Hansen.
I'm sorry. I was muted somehow and I haven't seen that before. Just a couple of questions. First, did you have any assurances that these plans were developed in conjunction with the local health authorities?
You know, Tiffany could chime in. Definitely the districts worked really well with their local health authorities. And I think the majority of the charters did. One of the things that we did to help our local health authorities was to get a list of all of our charters in the area of that county. And that was helpful. I think at the beginning, our local health directors definitely knew their districts, but weren't as familiar with their charters. So having those names and contacts really was a leap forward. Again, as Tiffany mentioned, with 134 plans, we see that there was coordination. To what level with all of our charters, I can't speak to, but that's one of the things we could go back and quantify. Tiffany, do you want to add to that?
I would say that in response to questions or requirements around containing outbreaks in those sections, quarantine and isolation protocols, that there was a significant, because the requirement really requires that they work with their local health department. So there was an assurance provided in those sections. However, there weren't necessarily specific requirements to work with your local health department in some of the other sections. So there weren't explicit assurances provided in those sections. But there was a lot of reference regardless. It's just that it wasn't specifically required, so they didn't specifically include it. That doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen.
And if you'd like us to follow up, board member Hansen, and gather some of that data, we're happy to do so. It was, like I said, it was very clear in all of the district plans and most of the charter plans, but we could also follow up.
I would appreciate that. I had a conversation with our local health department here that led me to believe that they had not been in contact with many of the charter schools. At least they had worked with the districts, but hadn't seen plans, at least from the many of the charter schools in this area. So hopefully that's a hole that we can plug. Next question is the transitions between the different instructional models. Did we see that those were tied to any kind of metrics, or were those in consultation with the health department, or what's the trigger to go from full up in person to online, or one of the variations in between a hybrid model?
Yeah, most often it was they referenced in consultation with the local health department, so that it would be, I don't think I saw many where there were specific metrics and thresholds called out. But generally it was the LEA will, in consultation with the local health department. Some referenced state, some referenced if the state or the governor requires us to go into one of these alternative models, then we will. So it did vary.
Okay, thank you. And then just the last one, I know you plan to post these. Will we be posting these on the USB website? When will that happen?
I think they were working on it this afternoon as we spoke. They were, you have to populate all of those into one place and then try and do a drop-down menu or something that makes it easy for people to find their LEA and click right to it. So
I know it's a huge task. I appreciate what you guys have done in the last few days in trying to put these things together and look at them and then get them up and available. So thank you for that. Just eager to look at them as well. So thank you.
I think by end of day tomorrow, Tiffany, unless I'm incorrect, I think that's what I heard.
And Board Member Earl?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, because I've read through several of these myself. I have 6 districts in my area. And so to be able to go through 173, what an awesome thing to overcome, to put together, and to put together some type of a visual for us to understand it. Just a couple of things. So those areas that districts or charters that you felt they hadn't completed what was asked, did you give a timeline? Was there a timeline for them? Was it a week or just as soon as you can, as soon as your next board meeting to have that completed? What was the timeline for that?
You know, anybody that I send a text to, if I saw something like they didn't have, like the template was outdated and didn't match the website, within 24 hours, it was there.
Okay.
And submitted. They were really responsive. We still have a couple of stragglers, as we mentioned, one charter that we're working with. And then we had a few that thought they had the right form in and it was something else. But I think Melissa or Tiffany would have to attest to this, but I believe Tuesday night or maybe even Wednesday morning, we had most of what we'd asked for. We still have to follow up a few little things, but they're not big glaring things that they're missing at this point, other than the one charter missing a plan.
Okay, I just wondered what the time frame was at that, but it sounds like they're trying to get those right in, probably for teachers and parents as much as making sure they're in compliance with what we requested. I just have another, maybe even an ask or maybe something to think about on our main coronavirus page, our page that we go to. I wonder if we could maybe, just with the increase of children being online, we've seen a lot of this going on, but just like in April of 2019, national line for exploitation of children had 1,000,000 reports. And the difference between 2019 and 2020 is this last April, there were 4 million reports come in. I just wonder, we have resources for abuse or exploitation of youth. I wonder if we could reference that somewhere on our just so that if districts have a need to put that out with more online usage, that's available as a resource for them. It may be a request or maybe something to consider, just so that they have access to those resources that we've recently approved and put out for communities to use. So just a thought on that area of it, just where we have so many kids online, and some of those may have parents that are at work, so there's not an adult there maybe during part of the day. So something to consider. Anyways, thank you.
Board Member Earl, thank you for that. We have 2 sections on our coronavirus website. We have one on remote learning and student confidentiality, and another on digital teaching and learning. And we'll make sure that we've got it covered in at least one or both of those places. We also have a tab on resources for students and families. And I know we've got a lot of that there, but we'll make sure that we target specifically what you're asking. Thank you for that suggestion.
Thank you.
Board Member Lear?
I just had one question. The concern I've heard, just anecdotally, you've done an amazing amount of work. You know a lot more about this than I do. But what I'm hearing anecdotally is lack of communication with parents, with teachers, from many, and several, and I can't even say a large number of LEAs, but did you have an assurance on the template that the required open board meeting was held to discuss this? And or second part of that question, did you follow up with any just spot checking to see if there was a there was a board agenda or were board minutes, or if they just signed the assurance, yes, we had the meeting, did you just take it at that?
That was a great question, Board Member. That was the first, one of the first slides that we shared, and it was really going in, and it's on that very front page. They have to give you an assurance, and then they had the website. So we clicked on the website, and then we looked for a date or board minutes or something that we could find that was actually done in board meeting.
And was that, in your view, was that pretty well documented? Did most of them actually prove out what they assured?
Right, because that's an assurance. So if we could not find that that was accurate, that's one of the things that we circled back with them on, to have that link and show us where it was done in
It
board meeting.
happened. Thank you for that.
And that might be an area that we're still cleaning up a little bit, Board Member Lair, with, again, 174 plans. I think we might have a couple. Melissa could either text or speak to that, or Tiffany might, but since it was right on the front page, that was the first action that we took on the plans.
I know that's a huge request from you, or a huge, and not blaming at all. I think that if that's what I'm hearing, I wanted, and there's usually enough responsibility on both sides, but I wanted to see that your experience was that most of the LEAs did what they were asked to do.
And Board Member Cannon?
Thank you, Chair. I want to address my question to Superintendent Dixon. I have watched the Trib Town Hall on reopening schools, and you were asked about what you would do when the USBE plans came into you, and you indicated that the plan was you would review all the plans. If there were holes or areas of concern, you would provide technical assistance and send them back to the districts for reconsideration. I'm wondering if you have done that, and if there were specific holes or areas of concern that you found, and what type of technical assistance might be incorporated.
Yeah, so I addressed that a little bit earlier, just in where we found a discrepancy. For example, if we saw something on masks that didn't comply with executive order, making a call, sending a text, and then having a conversation with the LEA head, and most of the time finding out, oh, it was on their website, it just wasn't updated in their plan, or getting clarity about what that looked like. We've had, in the creation of the plans, I think we've had a lot of people reach out to us to just get clarity about, what does this guidance mean? What does that guidance mean? What does this look like? So if we just saw something missing, or something that didn't jive with what we saw between the plan and the website, or there was a section missing, we would call and get clarity, and that technical assistance led to, here's a resource, here's some additional training. So those are the kinds of things that we talked about. Does that answer your question?
Yes, to a degree. Thank you. I probably, specific instances would be more revealing, but it's probably not appropriate to go into that here.
No,
So thank you.
It's all right. There wasn't anything really significant. You know, the ones that I reviewed, the only one that I really set one back was a district plan that used their, it was just sort of a summary document of a couple of pages. And so they needed to resubmit the template, and they didn't have anything on the website. So that's a clear, I'm sending this back, and here are the things you need to do. But other than that, it was pretty minor. It was a box that wasn't filled out, or, missing something minor. Tiffany, I don't know if you, Melissa, Jill saw other things, but that was my experience.
May I ask a follow-up?
You bet.
Another thing that was said in that the town hall was that there was an expectation that the LEAs would obtain input from health professionals before turning in their plan. Was that is that what you found going through these plans, that there had been input from health professionals?
Yeah, I think that's what we just addressed with Board Member Hanson, but definitely in the district plans, it was very evident, and most of the charter plans, it was evident that they had worked with them specifically on those items that Tiffany talked about, because that was health guidance, a lot of the mitigation tactics and looking at things like quarantine and contact tracing and isolation. That's where the health departments leaned in. They also referenced things that they had used, like the manual from the nurses, CDC guidelines, other guidelines when it came to health and hygiene. So they made reference to a lot of the ways that they were, especially that mitigation tactics, blue chart, blue boxes. That's where we saw a lot of those things played out.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from board members? Board Member Earl?
Yeah, just real quick, I got to attend two of these, two district meetings where they accepted their reopening plans in person, just because I was able to work the scheduling out. But I was very impressed, especially with one of my districts, that they just opened it up both online, or you could come in person, but they allowed any comments online, and they just waited for about a half hour. And anything that came in, they read it out loud, and then they wrote it down, and they said, we'll make sure we address this. If we don't address it in the meeting, we'll write a specific response to it. And I can't speak for all districts, but I was very impressed with the way it was handled, and in this particular area. So I think districts are wanting to meet the needs of educators and families and students, and do what is the best thing for all of them. So I just wanted to, just because I'd witnessed it recently, it was very impressive. So.
Other questions or comments from board members? Not seeing any hands up. I'd like to speak to, I think it's 15 or 16 districts that I represent. I've heard a lot from board members, more so this round than I thought I would hear from. I thought I'd hear more from superintendents, but it was fascinating to me to see how engaged board members were in this reopening plans and strategies. And so it kind of speaks to the local control issue that has been talked about quite a bit here in the last couple months. And from my districts, those board members took it very serious. And they also wanted to reach out and say thank you to USBE and for the help and support that. And these are mostly rural districts, with the exception of Nebo, that's in my voting district. But thank you to staff, and thank you, superintendent, for making this work. And they also had a great appreciation for their local health department folks that have been a part of this, and a lot of them have developed a really good relationship, because summer school's have been going on, and ever since the March 13th, 15th timeline, good relationships have been formed. So superintendent, thank you for making that happen also, as you've been working on your different committees. So kudos to you. Thank you. Any other questions or comments from board members on this? I know there's more to the reveal and there's more work. So thank you, staff, for jumping on this, and I know you still have more work to do. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. Superintendent, you want to sum this up?
Thank you, and thank you, board members, for the great questions. This was a lot of work by our charters and our districts, so I want to start there. I appreciate all the staff. I want to include Patty and Angie, who spent their weekend looking at waivers with us, and it wasn't just looking at the waivers. They had to cross-reference a lot of things in a plan, so I failed to mention them earlier, but they gave you the waiver report, and just know that they did a lot of work as well. It was a quick turnaround, but I just want to say how much I enjoyed really looking into the plans and seeing all the great work and the care that our educators have for our students. I appreciate the local health department. I feel like I'm a pseudo member of their team because they've been so gracious to include me and engage with me. I really appreciate Dr. Dunn, the State Department of Health, and the assistance they give us. And I'm looking forward to participating in this medical advisory group that can also help us with additional information and support so that we know how to turn around and support our schools. So thank you, Chair Huntsman, for placing this onto the agenda. And thanks to all the board members for supporting staff and being so patient with us as we look through all of these and give you this report.
Okay. Thank you, Superintendent.